Hi everyone, and welcome to Playtime Online. This is Institute of Play's webinar series that allows us to connect and share our work with you. I'm Moma Siddiqui, the producer and moderator of this program. Today we're exploring the power of play in games in the workplace, looking at Institute of Play's hands-on workshop Play at Your Org. This hour, we'll be learning all about the Museum of Modern Art's own Play at Your Org experience last summer, as well as how learning by doing promotes essential professional qualities like collaboration, problem solving, and creativity. Now let's meet our participants. So could everyone briefly introduce yourselves and your role in Play at Moma? Brian, do you want to start?
Sure. My name is Brian Wineski, and I'm the Managing Director of Institute of Play. And I am one of the facilitators of the workshop.
Great. And Greg? Oop, I think you're muted.
So my name is Greg Jeffrey. I'm a game designer with the Institute of Play, and was sort of there providing a lot of the game design expertise and helping lead some of the actual game design exercises that we did during the workshop.
Awesome. Nancy?
Hi, I'm Nancy Novacek. I'm the Director of Mobile Programs at the Institute of Play, and I worked with Brian to plan and facilitate the workshop at Moma.
Cool. And Sheetal?
Hi, I'm Sheetal. I'm an associate educator at the Museum of Modern Art in the Department of Education, and I was one of the participants in the workshop that they did at Moma last summer.
Thank you. And before we get started, I want to remind our viewers that if at any point you'd like to ask today's speakers a question, just click on the blue participate text under this video on the right-hand side. We'll be spending the last 15 minutes or so of the webinar answering questions during the Q&A portion. So let's kick off today's discussion with you, Brian. Could you tell us a little bit about Play at Your Org and how it came about?
Sure. So Play at Your Org actually developed organically out of the inquiries that we were getting from people who were interested in the Institute's work. A lot of people had seen what we had done in the context of Quest to Learn, which was to basically re-examine the experience of school in the interest of making it much more engaging and relevant to the people who were participating in the experience of school. And they looked at that work and saw that it had relevance to work that they were doing in their own organizations or with their own customer or consumer bases. So this included cultural institutions like the Museum of Modern Art that was rethinking what it meant, what visitor experience meant in the 21st century. It included big corporations that were thinking about, how to actually get people to want to be for a longer period of time at their companies. It had to do with people rethinking the retail experience, rethinking product experience. All sorts of different kinds of companies were kind of getting interested in our work. And we just didn't have the capacity as an organization to sort of give them all what they wanted, sort of taste of our work. So we thought about, could we develop a set of workshop-like experiences that would introduce them to the potential of games and play, show them what we had done with it, and then inspire them to start working with those lenses on their own challenges. And we ended up creating a couple different kinds of experiences. One was a kind of a two or 3 hour experience that we often did for executives at companies or cultural institutions, really just to introduce them, to get them playing a game, to get them thinking critically about that and what it might mean for them. And then the second kind of experience was the one we ended up doing at the Museum of Modern Art, which was a slightly more in-depth 3 or 4 day workshop that had a similar trajectory. We started out playing games, we moved into critical analysis of those games, then we actually got into game design, and then using those lenses to start to look at some challenges that Moma was facing in their own work. So that was kind of the genesis of the Play at Your Org workshop. It was nothing we ever really planned to do, but it was something that emerged organically from the demand that we were seeing for our work.
Thank you. And Nancy, you also helped plan this workshop. So I'm wondering, how is designing a program like this one around games and learning for adult professionals different than designing an experience for students? Because I understand some of the activities used in Play at Your Org are the same as ones that you use with students in, let's say, our Mobile Quest summer camp. So what are the fundamental differences between teaching the effectiveness of game and play in a professional setting versus a student setting?
Well, I think there is a lot of overlap, but the differences that we've noticed in these experiences are that it can sometimes take adults a little while longer to unleash their playfulness, and to kind of get them into a playful space, just because, you know, we are carrying around a lot of other stuff kids don't have to carry around every day. And so when we think about planning these sorts of things, we kind of allow for more literal playtime with adults than we do with kids, so that they can kind of get a little more warmed up and get into the mindset of play.
Great. So let's back up for a moment, and I want to talk about where and how exactly play and games can benefit the workplace. So Brian, could you walk us through some of the common engagement issues experienced by businesses and organizations, and how the Play at Your Org workshop is designed to help?
That's a big question. Yeah, I mean, the biggest change I've seen from people who have gone through this experience is, so people come into the experience, like let's say people who are developing either a product or a program, they're developing something. And they come into the experience very much in the mindset of, I'm going to develop something. I'm going to develop this thing, and then I'm going to put it out into the world, and people are going to react to it, and they're going to love it. Usually they think they're going to love it, right? The consideration that they might not love it doesn't come into their head. And that's one way of thinking. And then when you bring people into this experience, it's inviting them to think in a totally different way, where you're no longer kind of creating a thing that people are going to take and use, but you're creating a kind of space into which people can step to have a kind of experience. And it's actually a totally different way of creating. It's a way of creating that requires you to make some really quick assumptions and then test them out with people. You know, create your experience, see how people are actually going to react with it, play test it, and then go back and change it. But that shift in mindset from creating a thing, which is very much done and then putting it out, to creating a space into which people step to kind of make their own thing or have an experience or become creative, is a really big transition that I've seen people make through this experience. Nancy and I recently ran one of these things in Chicago for a group of 12 cultural institutions that was hosted at the Museum of Science and Industry. And that was just one of the biggest outcomes. There were a number of participants who started thinking that they had this project, they had this program, they were like sort of 90% done, and they were just coming to the workshop to kind of polish it up a little bit. And they left in a good way, thinking that gosh, they had a lot of work to do, because they really hadn't thought very much about creating this space that would engender participation and not just use of a product or a program, if that makes sense. I don't know if Nancy wants to add any more about that, because it was a really interesting transition to see people go through, I thought.
Yeah. That was really well said, Brian. Spaces instead of things. I mean, I think just to add a little bit to that, there is something really important in the creating of that space to actually give people a kind of real space, and space in the form of time to kind of start to make those connections, because we think of adults as actually being, especially adults in a professional setting, as being quite efficient and economical and fast. And this work actually goes best when it goes slower, and when everyone has time to kind of be slow and kind of move around ideas in a space without a kind of strict time frame. And I think that's what it means to actually be at play, is to not be so mindful of time, but to be kind of more mindful of the experience at hand.
Thanks, Nancy. So coming back to this idea of engagement issues, Sheetal, I was wondering if you could talk about MoMA's own engagement hurdles.
Sure. Well, MoMA is a very big institution. There are about 700 people that work here, and like most museums, our institution structurally is pretty traditional in terms of staff. We have big departments that handle large areas of practice, from curatorial to education to marketing, things like that. We also, you know, when you're in a large institution like this, things tend to move really slow, but slow in a different way than what Nancy is talking about. Slow more in the sense that a lot of people are involved in all of the decision making. And so the way we practice internally is something that continues to be a challenge for an institution as large as we are, because we're really interested in trying to be a little bit more agile and trying to think more broadly about, as Brian was saying, what engagement looks like in the museum. I think externally, some of our hurdles are kind of in the same vein, in the sense that people have expectations of MoMA and the kinds of programs we offer, and we are always striving to kind of meet those expectations. But I think what is starting to happen now, especially in the education department, under the leadership of our Director of Education, Wendy Woon, she is really interested in not just offering what people expect, but offering something new and something that they might not expect to get at a place like MoMA. And that's a challenge for us, because it has to change not only the way we program, but the way we think about what engagement actually means in our spaces. That's a general overview.
Great. And Greg, as the sole professional game designer in this webinar today, from your experience, what is it about games that make them so useful or beneficial in a professional type setting?
I think it goes back to, I think everyone sort of touched on it in different ways, but again, it's that sort of process of just iteration, of having to get in there and actually experiment with stuff over and over again. Games, once you start making a game, you realize that they're really super complex, and even if they're really simple, and it gets very hard to see, a couple steps down the road. And so I think this is one of the things that I find sort of most valuable about them, and it's sort of the practice of making them, is that practice of, like, that moment where everyone wants to talk about the games, go, oh, this is going to happen, and people are going to have this experience, and it's going to be amazing, and at the end, boom, and that's never the case. And what doing game design forces you to do is that, like, once you have your initial idea, just try it out, like, just actually see what you can do, like, and then see what happens, in the first step into the process, second step, because it's never what you think, right? Just when you start involving people and spaces and time, things get super complex very quickly, and that complexity is super hard to sort of handle, and as a sort of the practice of game design teaches you that, really, in a really sort of brutal way. You're sort of constantly hit by, confronted with the complexity of everything, and so developing that practice of iteration, I think, is super helpful in terms of, like, any sort of process where you're going to make interactive things where people have to engage.
It's interesting too, because the transition Greg is talking about is one that almost every organization nowadays is going through, whether it's a company or a cultural institution. I mean, organizations in some sense were designed to just kind of control or really tightly constrain outcomes of whatever they're doing, in ways that created money or created cultural capital or whatever it is they're engaged in. And that kind of world in which those kinds of systems function is no longer with us. And so these businesses, organizations are finding themselves in much more complex operating environments. We actually can't control, can't constrain like they used to. And so they have to find new ways of doing and being on an organizational level. And game design is, I think, one way to get them thinking in a more iterative kind of mode.
So Greg or Brian, sorry, what, Greg? No.
I was going to add to that. I mean, it's like, and it's true. It's like, I mean, the sort of this notion of that iterative design loop is you see it reflected in lots of things, as Brian was saying, like the way the organizations are run, everything, how software is developed, like that old style of waterfall development where, like, we plan everything out and it's, woo, we know how it's going to end. Everyone sort of has learned that they have to give up on that notion. And so you see in software development too, like a more agile approach, which looks a lot like the sort of iterative design process. You see that in product development and other places as well. So, sorry.
I also wanted to add a little bit to that, because I think these are really good points, but I want to take it back just one more step, because our experience with the Institute of Play brought up some really basic things about the way we work internally that I think sometimes we forget about, but I think they're really critical to thinking about engagement in new ways or thinking about doing something new at your institution. You have to really think about your internal practice. And for those of us that participated in the workshop, some of the things that we were specifically thinking about is how we can share skills internally and how we actually collaborate and communicate with each other internally. And there are lots of different ways to make that happen, but games was a really, it created a very democratic space for us. We came from different departments at different levels, and we were all able to sit at the table and really learn a lot about each other as well as play together. And I think that is a really important part of the workshop that I don't know if leaders are always thinking about that aspect of it, but it's fairly critical to getting people to think in new ways. They have to learn to actually work in new ways together.
Yeah, there was a wonderful moment in the Moma workshop where we were all playing a game called Joust, which is where you have these like little wands with lights on them, and you're sort of in a space, and everyone is trying to touch the other people's wands, and you're trying to guard the wands. And suddenly you had CFO type people with researchers and program people, and everyone just playing together. And it's those kinds of moments that are really magical and can ignite a team in ways that are just very fresh.
Yeah, I mean, I think that sort of democratizing element of games is interesting. It's like, I mean, I sometimes I hesitate to wrap up too much in the sort of the playfulness of everything. You know, it's like, oh, if we just play, but there is that like great moment. And I always think of it like whenever we played Ninja, and we did that at the Moma workshop, where it's like the game begins, and if I describe the game, it's like, oh, and then we're going to slap hands, and it's a ninja fight, and you're talking to a bunch of adults, and they're looking at you like, that sounds dumb. Like, we shouldn't do that. But the best thing is the game starts with this moment where everyone like leans in, and they're all like, 3, 2, 1, ninja, and they jump back. And at that moment, like, you've made everyone look like a fool equally. And it is this great moment where everyone is sort of, it does democratize things. It pulls everyone in really quickly and puts everyone on a sort of even playing field. And that is, I do think that is a super valuable thing about games.
Great. So I think we should get into the actual Play at Moma workshop since we're starting to describe all of these games. I'm going to play a quick clip from the event last summer. Let me see if I can get it up. If you guys can't see it, please let me know. Just want to make sure it works. Oops. Can you see my screen?
I can see it.
Okay.
I think we're missing sound on the... I can see it.
Okay, so I don't know if our viewers were able to see or hear the video, but it sure looked like a lot of fun. So I think, can everybody unmute themselves? I think something happened with the technology. Just want to make sure I can hear everyone.
I'm here.
Okay.
I'm here.
Great. Okay, so how was it looking at that video? Any memories or anything? Okay, so Brian, Sheetal mentioned a few of Moma's own engagement issues earlier, their hurdles, and I'm wondering how you went about designing the workshop around the museum's specific needs.
Yeah, so the workshop is really...
Okay, so I don't know if our viewers were able to see or hear the video, but it sure...
Sorry, so the workshop was structured in a way that the first 2 days, the first 2 half days, I should say, are really kind of a general introduction to games and play and to game design. So in those first 2 days, we do activities where we encourage people to think about whatever they might be thinking about in the context of their own institutions, but we're also at the same time trying to bring them out of those frames of mind. So to sort of broaden their perspective. And it's not really until the 3rd day that we start to narrow in on the challenges that they might be facing in their own institutions. So in the case of the workshop we designed for Moma, Sheetal, correct me if I'm wrong, if I can remember correctly, but I think that we had people on the 3rd day in cross-functional teams and small teams of, I think, 5 or 6 people, and we had them sort of go through a pretty standard design process to identify a kind of opportunity they wanted to work on within Moma. And then through a series of steps, invited them to bring game design to bear on that opportunity. And what we ended up with, I think in most cases, were kind of prototype experiences or interactions that by the end of the day were kind of acted out and tested and recorded, and which could form the basis for further development within the teams proper. Does that jive with your memory, Sheetal?
Yeah, that's pretty much exactly what happened. I think that last part of the workshop was really important for us because the people in the workshop were from all over the museum, all departments, and we got to role play together, which a little bit different than playing a game together, but it was a really important process in thinking about how we were going to present the idea and kind of how things actually played out in the experience you're constructing, getting to have that experience ourselves.
The best part that I remember was Nancy on her knees playing a petulant 2-year-old.
She was very good at that.
I'm blushing.
So I guess this question's for all of you, really. I'm just curious to know more about the activities that you played and what each of the activities taught or you were able to achieve through the activities.
Well, do you mind if I start? Because I just have
Yeah, go for it.
About this a little bit. So the workshop was, from my view, was in the 3 major parts. The first part was actually playing games that they offered us to play both online and analog, like the Ninja game that we were talking about earlier. The second part was actually taking a game that existed and getting into teams and reworking it, adding components to it, changing the goals of it, so forth and so on. And then the last major part of the workshop was actually getting in teams and creating a game from the ground up. And those are kind of the 3 large umbrellas. But what was really great about the 3 days, the arc was very additive in terms of skill building and working together. Each day we had to work together more intimately to create a game or go through a process together. And I think that one of the things that was kind of implicitly emphasized in the workshop, because it was about games and play, was experimentation. And that was kind of a sub-theme, I would say. I don't know if Brian and the team would say the same thing, but for us, that was a huge turning point. To think about creating something by actually experimenting with it, actually doing it, and figuring out whether it worked or not. We at MoMA, as I was saying before, you know, there's a high level, there are high stakes, everything we do here. But this process was really important in showing us that experimentation is one of the most effective ways to work out problems.
And Sheetal, can I ask a follow-up question to that?
Yeah.
So were you able to bring that realization or that different way of working back into your everyday work life, and what did that look like?
Yeah, so actually after that workshop, one of the things that we had been working on internally was rethinking in-gallery engagement. And we offer, you know, gallery tours that are regular, about 45-minute discussion-based tours of various exhibitions and spaces. And we wanted to do something different, and we wanted to find a way to have a little bit more of a less formal interaction in the galleries that engaged people with more than just listening and talking. And so we came up with some ideas in the department, and then we decided to test and prototype our ideas within the education department, our staff of 20 people. So we went out into the galleries and tested these and kind of did these guerrilla interactions in the galleries for about 3 or 4 months. And we had an evaluator with us, so she was able to talk to the people that engaged with us and all of that. And now that is a strategy that we're going to start implementing into our formal program. It's taken about a year for us to test, get the results, and then implement it with some of our educators. But this year, we're making a serious public commitment to it.
And in your mind, how is that improved or changed the way that you work together? How does it feel different, or what is it?
First of all, for us in education, there are about 24 of us, and we don't often all get to work together because we all work in different audience areas. So the first thing was that through this testing, we got to pair up with people that we don't work with on a daily basis, but we sit 10 feet away from. So at a basic level, that was really important because we were starting to learn from each other through the process of creating these experiences. And then the second thing was that there was a department-wide investment in what happened and the results. And in understanding that, yes, maybe the adult programs team is the one administering this, but we've all had a voice in how this has come together. And I think that was really important for us.
Sheetal, I'm also wondering, when did you start noticing you and your coworkers were having fun? What day was it? What activity was it? When was that the breakthrough?
During the workshop?
Yeah.
Well, for me, I'll just say it was from before the workshop started, because they sent us a list of games that we could play. So I was starting to have fun even before, so it got me really excited. I think the first time, I think as a group, the group that I was in that started having fun was when we started rethinking a game that already existed. And it really made us break down the game together, and it was really fun to think about why this game was so popular and could we do anything to improve it? I mean, it just brought up a lot of fun questions, things that we don't think about that much on a day-to-day basis. And yeah, that was when we started having fun, I'd say.
Great. And then also, could Sheetal, maybe you or Greg, can you guys talk about the benefits of learning and creating in teams?
Brian, do you want to start? And I can just I have a lot of thoughts about that. I'm sure you do too.
That's a big question too. I mean, Sheetal already brought up some of the benefits of that, which is that there's a broader sense of buy-in. You know, there's better communication between parts that don't necessarily communicate all the time. There's also, I mean, when you learn in teams, what you've learned, the sort of gains you've made through learning are sort of committed not just to the memory of one person, which can be hard to access and fleeting, but committed to the memories of many people. So it tends to make for more institutional continuity, which is nice. I don't know, does anyone have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I mean, in terms of like designing in teams, I think there's a huge value in, I mean, just one, having people to collaborate with and you know, small group to instantly play test stuff with. If you're designing by yourself, and especially if it's interactive stuff, it's almost impossible to really begin to that play testing process without some people there to collaborate with. Because if you're like, okay, well, how would I interact with the system? I know where it all goes. I would just do this, or do the right thing. And having other people there to kind of help you poke at that stuff really shows you where the holes are. Because I mean, designing interactive systems for groups of people require people, right? And so sort of, in my opinion, with like the design of them, the more people you can kind of throw at them, and the more sort of different perspectives and insight, that you're getting into the design often leads to a fuller design that is taking into account multiple perspectives, And I think, sometimes people are precious about like, oh, I want to design this thing and have it be this one beautiful, this beautiful thing I've made. But I think with games, I mean, they are polished objects which exist sort of outside the existence of like one person, and they take on a life of their own, and they're really about how they interact with other people. So designing in teams, I think, is really crucial. Like in every class I teach about game design, someone is always like, I want to work alone. I'm like, I wouldn't if I were you.
I just wanted to add to that. I remember the second day of the workshop, Sheetal came in, and we were kind of talking about what had happened the day before, and she raised her hand as proud as like a first grader, and she was like, I got home last night and I realized that we made a game, and it's a game that I want to play, and I never thought I would be a game designer. And that was a really personal reflection, but you could feel it shared around the room. And what was really wonderful is that everyone felt that they had done that thing together, and that was a really potent moment for me.
Yeah, I also just want to add to that in terms of making and designing in teams, one of the things that has really been beneficial for us in our work in the arts, and was also, I think, re-emphasized through this workshop, was this idea of creative collective thinking, that creativity is a group effort. And yes, we can all individually have good ideas, but this understanding that the collection of them is more powerful. And I think another thing that is really important, I think, when you work in teams, and has started to happen here as well when we're working with people outside of education, let's say, is being able to think in non-linear ways or non-familiar ways to yourself. When you're in teams, you're kind of forced to try to understand the way somebody else is analyzing or processing information, and that can be really important to getting a better result in the end. And it's not always easy. There is a tendency for some people, they are more comfortable working alone, but it's a really good way for institutions, when you work through teams, to recognize hidden skills or unknown skills that individuals have. Sometimes working in teams bring those things out in ways that working in just your job and what you do can't always do. So I think those are some really important things that that team building and working in teams can bring to institutions.
I mean, the other thing is just, especially when the groups were first engaging in game design activities, the fact is it's really hard. Like it's a totally different way of thinking for most people who don't do it on a regular basis. So, having more brains than one to draw on is a really important advantage.
I also want to talk about the benefits of participants in the workshop acting out their ideas, so playtesting, versus just writing their ideas onto Post-it notes, actually doing it. Nancy, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I didn't know if Greg or I were going to talk about that. Yeah, so that was a big moment for us. I mean, we are playing just as hard as everyone else in the room as facilitators, in that we're trying to be like quite responsive to the people we're working with and what is happening from moment to moment and the kind of energy of the room. And oftentimes, design workshops can become just a universe of Post-it notes on walls, and that is, you know, there's a great place for that, but we found that everyone was getting just a little bit stuck at that point. And Greg had this great moment of saying, well, you know, why don't we have them act it out? Why don't we have them think about something that they really want to see and make that happen as actors rather than just thinkers? And that moment for me was a really important moment as both a designer and a facilitator in this particular context, because, you know, we talk about all the time at the Institute about how to play a game you have to actually be doing it. Games require action, and so, you know, we had the system where people were thinking about acting on Post-its, and the minute we actually had them move into the space of action, it was wildly successful in a way that the Post-its just weren't kind of doing.
How do you think it changed their perspective?
I think Sheetal talked a little bit about this. I think actually putting oneself in the middle of the experience as one of the stakeholders or one of the users really changes things instantaneously. Like Brian noted, I was playing a 2-year-old, but I did that to make a point, because there were some assumptions about how kids were going to behave in this situation that I kind of wanted to poke at.
Greg, did you want to add anything?
Well, yeah, no, I was going to point out exactly what Nancy had just mentioned. I think that was sort of, for me, the great moment. It was like, and this is why you always play test, right? It's like, because people are going to behave in ways you can't imagine. And so when Nancy acted like a petulant 2-year-old, you know, that was great. That was like, you know, you kind of build these little models of how your system's going to work, and then you know, if you play it yourself, you put in place the behavior you want to have to see. You know, oh, this is clearly what people will do. They'll come in and they'll behave. You know, these kids will be really well behaved, and they'll hold their parents' hands, and they won't scream. And you know, that's not what little kids are going to do. That's not what, you know, teenagers and some adults won't do that. And so that moment where when you're acting it out, and you suddenly, like, some other unforeseen variable gets entered into the system, and you see, like, oh, this is where it either holds together or falls apart. That's the educational part of playtesting in design. And so that moment was really nice. Yeah, in general, like with the playtesting, you know, that's like with all the sort of, again, with all the classes I teach a game design class at NYU, and like, if I can get through the semester, and I'll consider it a success if I hear someone at the end be like, oh, you know, if they start talking about an idea, and after about like 30 seconds, they're like, we ought to play test this right now. And I'm like, okay, that's good. They've got whatever they need to do in front of the semester. And I feel like a total failure when, like, it happened last week when some students were like, they were showing a final project, and they're like, oh yeah, I guess we should have play tested this. And I was like, oh my God, I've totally failed you. Because that's really where at the heart of it is seeing just like what happens when things are released into the wild.
I just want to make one comment about what you said about playtesting. That was just another big thing that came out for us and has been incorporated in some of our process. This idea that you can experiment and you can fail, that's okay, and then you just do it again. And failure is a word that I think a lot of people are scared of, and I think sometimes institutions shy away from. But without going through that testing process, you're not going to know what works. And that has become part of the way we've thought about some of our programs here at Moma, because the workshop gave us the freedom in some ways to fail. I don't know, that might be the simplest way to say it. And that is very liberating. And I think that playtesting is something that designers are very used to in their practice, but people like us who work in museums, that's not always been how we do things. So those kinds of skills are really important in just getting to that comfort level with working in those kinds of ways.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely. I think that's Sheetal. I think you're absolutely right. It's like, and it's it's tough for game designers as well. Like, I mean, that sort of feeling of like you have to stand there and watch your best laid plans laid laid to havoc or chaos. But it's like it's a skill you have to develop, and you only do that by watching it. And so it's like you watch people who are really good at it, and they, you know, and it teaches a lot of things. It teaches like both like sort of this dispassionate like observation of what's going on. Like, okay, here are all the variables that are here. Like I thought this was going to happen. That's happening. That's happening. That's good. That's not good. How do I get? Oh, that seems good. How do I get more of that and less of that? So you begin to process it like that, and think of like how you begin to isolate the variables, and then, you know, think about how you change things. And it also teaches you a lot of empathy, you know, to really sort of observe things with a fair amount of empathy. Like, oh, this person says they're having fun. They're clearly not having fun. They're just telling me that because they you know, they want free tickets or pizza or whatever. And so you know, you have to learn to read people and read situations, and then also feel like you want to deliver to them this thing. And so how do I this experience? How do I do that with all these things I have here? And it's tough. It like takes a lot of practice and to get good at it. And I know lots of game designers who are really horrible at it as well. Sometimes I am.
Yeah, especially for companies, it can represent a different way of working or an alternative way of working to traditional focus groups or things like that. We're actually seeing people interacting with what you produced. But hey, Sheetal, I heard that you guys redesigned your conference room as a result of the workshop.
We did redesign our conference room. I wish I should have thought about that. I would have taken pictures for this. But yeah, so our conference room had a big table with a bunch of chairs around it until last summer. And last summer after the workshop, we started putting in, we took out the table, and we have all kinds of alternative seating at different heights, different softness levels, and it really, the place just feels a lot easier and a lot less formal, which I think is a mood that is important to have when you're coming into a meeting. But I could definitely say that people from other departments that come up to the education offices and then come have a meeting in our conference room are very jealous of what we've done. It's colorful, it's comfortable. One of the walls is now a chalkboard wall, so we can write ideas and leave them up there to share with kind of other people that are coming through the space. It's really great.
I wanna visit. That sounds really awesome.
Come visit, yeah.
So I want to move on, and I want to ask Brian about a new collaboration between Moma and Institute of Play. You guys are making a game for Moma visitors. Is that correct?
Yeah, I can say a few words, and then maybe Greg can say more.
Okay.
But yeah, another thing that came out of the workshop we did with Moma was a deeper collaboration with them around what a visitor game might look like that would invite everyone into the galleries for what we hope will be a deeper experience with the collections. There, and Greg is taking the lead on designing that game with the Moma team.
Yeah, I mean, it's been an interesting process. We've been working on it for a couple months now, in doing the design. But it was great. I mean, having done a workshop beforehand, it was interesting. We kind of all hit the ground running with this sort of shared lexicon of things like, oh, these are sort of the constraints we have. These are how we're gonna these are sort of rules we're going to create and the system we're going to create and play test, and everyone kind of came to that, and so it made the actual process of starting super smooth and easy. You know, I've worked with lots of different teams that want to do some sort of game thing, and it's always difficult. And I think one of the best things about the sort of that initial shared sort of knowledge was like a real understanding of like what the sort of constraints were going to be, like what things we could do and couldn't, could realistically expect to do and not do. That was really interesting. No one was like, oh, and the game also has to do this, and it has to educate people and be fun and have lasers. It was much more like, oh, here's this sort of narrow thing we're going to focus on. This is what we want to get people to do, this sort of interaction in the gallery. How do we do that, And that's like a much more realistic sort of design space to be in. And then
because everyone in the room had already sort of gone through the pain of trying to design a game together, they were much more realistic about the kinds of expectations they were bringing to that.
Yeah, exactly. They could have been like, no, you guys are the professionals, go do this. And so then and the other big thing for us too, and the big realization is that like the sort of the things that a lot of the challenges that MoMA had are the exact same challenges that we would have in doing sort of one of these big physical games. You know, there's always questions about like how tight you can make the instructions. What does wayfinding look like? What are length of engagements that people are going to have? How do you communicate to people that don't, English is their native language? All these sorts of things are things we think about as game designers, and also, the MoMA was clearly thinking about as well. So it's like once we started writing up on that chalkboard in the conference room, all these different ideas and constraints, it was like, it was fun. It was like, it felt like they were, the problem felt very much like it was like, how do we do engagement in the museum and how do we make a game? And they felt like the same, two sides of the same problem, which was really interesting. And yeah, from there we dove into, we kind of came up with an idea, and we've been going out into the galleries and play testing it. We just working with the education team there and walking up to strangers in the gallery and saying, hey, will you play test this game for us? Which is always fun and nerve-wracking to see.
Yeah, I can just add one more thing to what Greg already touched on. The trajectory of the collaboration we've had with the Museum of Modern Art, from our perspective, is kind of ideal. We started with a kind of taster 2 or 3 hour chat with a group of folks, and then from there went to this longer format workshop of 3 or 4 days, and then from there went to a deeper, longer term collaboration over the course of a few months to actually design something together. And that just seems like the ideal collaboration, because you're just going deeper and deeper, and with each increase in depth in that engagement, you have a common vocabulary, you have really realistic expectations about what can actually be accomplished together, and you have a lot of trust too. So it's been really fabulous working together with them.
Great. So I think we should move on to the Q&A portion. We're running out of time. The first question is from Heather. She missed the intro, so I think we've already, let's go ahead and ask the question. Were there other departments outside of education represented at the workshop? How do those departments interact now? Is it any different than before the workshop? Are they more playful now when collaborating together on projects?
So yes, in the workshop there were people from marketing, there were people from graphic design, there were senior staff there was finance staff there, digital media staff there, our social media person was there, so it was quite a spread of people. The workshop was about, I think, 25 people, is that right, Brian? Around there?
Oh, Brian,
right?
You're muted.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah. Oh yeah, so there was a nice cross section of people. That's the first part, and then in terms of how we interact differently or are more playful, I would say that right now the most successful kind of results of that have been outside of education, have been with marketing and our social media. So we are currently in the process of just thinking about how education and marketing work together. And what is a more efficient way for us to work together and to collaborate on kind of how our messaging goes out about our programs. We've done that in informal ways before, but we're starting to think more seriously about it now. The second thing that I think is really important that has happened is internally we've created a social media kind of forum or team that has representation from multiple departments in the museum to think more collectively and collaboratively about how and where we share content on social media and how to share our voices with each other on our various platforms.
Great. So the next question is from Thomas, and he asks, would it be valuable for an organization to do this workshop with employees once a year, or maybe for training or onboarding purposes?
Yeah, I mean the beginning of the workshop was really at the Quest schools out of an experience called Mobile Quest, which was originally conceived as an induction experience for students coming into the culture of the school. So you could very easily imagine this being an induction experience for employees or staff coming into the culture of an organization, and especially for an organization that put a high value on play, innovation, team learning, this would be an ideal experience to go through. And you know, we with the Museum of Science and Industry, we've done this kind of experience 2 years running now. So we actually have done you know, an annual experience for them, and that's also been really interesting to do, because you see the skills of the people involved growing each year. You see the kind of experience you have to build for them to support that growth, change. So I could see a lot of value in both of those things.
Nancy, Greg, or Sheetal, do you have anything to add? Nope. Okay, so the next question comes from Will, and he asks, are there online materials available for companies interested in doing a workshop like this?
Yeah, so there's a page on our website, which you can find through the work section of the website, which is called Play at Your Org, and there's it's a sort of one-pager about the experience. There's also a link to the video that we made at the Museum of Modern Art, which we tried to show but without sound, so you can actually see that with sound. And you know, we're always happy to have a conversation, so you can really just be in touch with us if you want to chat about it more.
Yeah, and at the end of the Hangout, if you refresh the page, I'll be posting those materials and also a link to the video, so you can actually see it for those who want to. So our final question is from Harriet, and she asks, do the workshops have to be 3 days long? I think we already covered that, but if somebody wants to answer it.
I mean, I don't think so.
I'll take it.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, no, Brian and I are in agreement. Yeah, no, the workshops don't have to be 3 days long. It's the length of time that we found really successful for to create a foundation in kind of games and the game design process, and then how that might apply to your organization. However, it's a flexible form, and like we said earlier, it could be a kind of an afternoon experience. It could be a longer engagement. For us, it's a scaffolding that we kind of tailor to the organizations we work with.
I should add, though, that the experience we did for Moma, and also the one we did for the Museum of Science and Industry and a couple other people, it was actually 3 half-days. So that folks had a chance in the morning to kind of do their work, to try to climb the email mountain, and they came to us in the afternoon, not totally stressed and scattered. So that seemed really important, that you actually didn't lose control of your work over the course of the workshop.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good point. So would anybody like to add any final closing remarks? Nope. Okay, so I think I'm going to wrap it up. Please join us next time for the next episode of Playtime Online, which is on Wednesday, May 22nd. GlassLab will be revealing its newest iteration of the SimCity EDU game prototype. This includes the full feature set, like the back-end teacher tools, providing insight into students' problem-solving skills and comprehension. For updates on Playtime Online, please sign up for our mailing list. Just click on the Join Us at the top of this page. Thanks for watching, everyone. And if you like what we're doing, please spread the word. Have a great afternoon. Bye, everyone.